Miller, and I'm the president of the Rhinebeck Historical Society. We're here today to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the opening of the Rhinebeck Post Office in May of 1939. President Roosevelt gave the main speech after his opening remarks by Secretary of Treasury Henry Morgenthau in his presentation of the post office to Postmaster General James Farley. Many dignitaries were in attendance, including the First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, Sarah Roosevelt, the Crown Prince Frederick of Denmark and Iceland, and his wife, Princess Ingrid, who laid the cornerstone, and Laura Delano and others. The post office is a replica of the Kip Beekman Hermance house in Rhinecliff. Many of the stones used in its construction are from the remnants of that house, and its lintel, dated 1700, is on display inside. The famous artist Olin Dowes painted the murals that wrap around the walls of the post office, depicting the history of Rhinebeck. Postmaster Michael Letteries has generously agreed to keep the post office open after the program so you can view the murals. The Master of Ceremonies was Benson R. Frost, and I'd like to take a couple of minutes to read Benson's opening remarks. Mr. President, Your Royal Highnesses, distinguished and honored guests, ladies and gentlemen, we have come here today to dedicate a specific and to a public use a new building. We have gathered here to participate in the laying of the cornerstone upon which the structure emblematically rests. We are acutely aware that this memorable occasion is at once both unique and unusual. In the erection of this new edifice, we are turning again to the early colonial traditions and history of our people. We are transplanting, yes, we are rebuilding the family dwelling of Henry Beekman, the founder of Rhinebeck. Stones that were shaped and placed by human hands in that early Beekman house in 1700 have again found their way into the walls of the building before us. Here, under the authority of the President of the United States, here assisted by royal visitors coming from a far country whose traditions and usages we so hope often to look for inspiration and help, before leading officials in national life, surrounded by distinguished guests, and in the presence of people of every rank, we unite in doing honor to the Beekman family, the founders of our community, to their style of architecture, to the choice of materials with which they worked, but far and beyond that, to their manly virtues, their high qualities of character, and their sturdy Americanism. We recall with pride our distinguished guests and neighbor, the President of the United States, is related to the Beekman family, and that some of his ancestors formerly lived in Rhinebeck. It is indeed fortunate for us that there should be in Washington one in authority bound to us by these natural ties, anxious to perpetuate the Beekman influences, appreciative of the beauty and utility of fieldstone, and with the power to select a town where a post office may be built. I would be remiss this afternoon if I did not use this opportunity to express to the President the genuine thanks and appreciation of our entire community for his real and inspired interest in the erection of this building. The selection of the site, the type of architecture, the use of fieldstone, and the many, many details which have received his attention and his approval. For all of this, we are deeply grateful. And with that, with pleasure, I assure his royal guests that we most keenly appreciate their gracious courtesy in coming to us this afternoon and their participation in this program. The memory of their gracious act will always remain with us and our people. Then he said, "It is my happy privilege and an honor I shall always cherish to present the President of the United States."
My Royal Highnesses, Mr. Secretary, Mr. Postmaster General, my friends and neighbors of the town of Rhinebeck. Half a century ago, a small boy was often driven through the town of Rhinebeck by his father and mother to visit his great uncle and aunt at their home south of Berrytown. On those drives up the post road, which, as I remember, were always either dusty or muddy, he passed a number of old stone houses, most of them with long, sloping roofs, and was told that they had been built by the early settlers nearly 2 centuries before. Then, as I grew older, I came to know something of the history of these river towns of Dutchess County, and to develop a great liking for the stone architecture which was indigenous to the Hudson Valley. We call it by the generic name of Early Dutch Colonial. Even though some of the houses, as in this neighborhood, were built by German settlers from the Palatines. Because through one line of my ancestry, I am descended from the early Beekmans who settled Rhinebeck, and because on the Roosevelt side, my great-great-grandfather lived in Rhinebeck for some time during the Revolution and was a member of the Dutchess County Militia, I have a claim to kinship with this town that is second only to the town of Hyde Park. And by the way, the Postmaster General will sustain me if I pin a medal on myself. 2 years ago, under the congressional appropriation, one post office was allocated to Dutchess County. The Postmaster General asked me if I didn't want the new building located in the village of Hyde Park, where we most certainly need a post office. But I told him that Rhinebeck was in equal need of a post office, and that because Rhinebeck was twice the size of Hyde Park, Rhinebeck should be served first. I gave notice, however, that my unselfishness is coming to a limit, and that if I get another chance to choose a Dutchess County site, my own townspeople's complaint will receive sympathetic attention. I am hereby putting the Postmaster General and the Secretary of the Treasury on notice. You all know the inspiration for the design of the building we dedicate today. Fortunately, I'm old enough to remember the old house on River Road in which were entertained so many famous men before, during, and after the Revolutionary War, that we have been able to copy the original part of it is a fortunate thing, and we are grateful too that we have been able to incorporate much of its original stone in these walls of the post office. Soon too, the old cornerstone will be on display inside the lobby, together with a famous pane of glass, which has been given by Miss Sukley and which was rescued from the fire by John Jacob Astor. Furthermore, within a short time, a most interesting frieze painted by Mr. Olin Dowes will grace the lobby. It is, I think, an interesting fact that during the past few years, the federal government, in the designing of post office buildings, has been getting away from the sameness of pattern which characterized the past. The procurement division of the Treasury Department has sought to diversify design so that our newer post offices do not look as though they had been turned out by the dozen. We are seeking to follow the type of architecture which is good, in the sense that it does not of necessity follow the whims of the moment, but seeks an artistry which will be good for all time to come. And we're trying to adapt the design to the historical background of the locality and to use, insofar as possible, the materials which are indigenous to the locality. Hence, my effort during the past few years in federal buildings in the Hudson River Valley to use fieldstone and to copy the early Dutch architecture, which was so essentially sound. May I make a suggestion to you, my neighbors of Rhinebeck? At this crossroads of the village, we now have the new post office, the old Beekman Arms Inn, and beyond it, the old stone building on the upper corner. As time goes on, some of the other buildings on the other side of the street, and on this side as well, will be replaced by newer buildings. These other buildings are substantial enough, but in my opinion, are set too close to the street and represent a type of architecture known as Victorian, which is not exactly in keeping with what we now call good taste. When replacements occur, as they undoubtedly will in the years to come, I hope that new buildings will be set further back from the street, that they will conform more to the colonial type, and that you here in Rhinebeck will have here what in effect would be a large open square admired for its beauty by all who pass. A happy coincidence brings us today to a unique opportunity. The cornerstone at Rhinebeck's new post office is about to be laid as a part of this ceremony of dedication. The post office has been built by the Secretary of the Treasury, who is with us. It has been turned over by him to the Postmaster General, who also is with us. The Crown Prince and Crown Princess of Denmark have come to us, having voyaged from Denmark through the Panama Canal to San Francisco, and they have crossed the continent after that. They have, I am glad to say, had an opportunity to see a large part of the United States, and they are very welcome. I'm about to present them to you, and His Royal Highness the Crown Prince has graciously consented to wield the trowel and formally lay the cornerstone of this building, of which we are all so proud. During all the years to come, during the long life which lies ahead of our new post office, generations who live here will always remember that the cornerstone was laid by our distinguished guest. Ladies and gentlemen, the Crown Prince and the Crown Princess of Denmark and Ireland. And Iceland, my apologies.
Pleasure. You can't see it, but the cornerstone says Franklin D. Roosevelt, President of the United States of America, Henry Morgenthau Jr., Secretary of the Treasury, James Farley, Postmaster General, Christian Joy Peoples, Director of Procurement, Louis A. Simon, Supervising Architect, Neil A. Mellick, Supervising Engineer, and R. Stanley Brown, Architect, 1938. It's over there.
Our next speaker, Anthony Musso, is here to give you some background on President Roosevelt's love of stamp collecting and post offices. Tony is a weekly columnist for the Poughkeepsie Journal and the author of 5 books, his first being FDR and the Post Office. That book reviews Roosevelt's lifetime interest in stamp collecting and how, once as president, he had a significant impact on the both stamp collecting industry and the Department of the Post Office. Not only did FDR review and approve every stamp issued during his 4 terms as president, but he also hand drew several and oversaw the construction of 406 post offices nationwide as part of the WPA program. And 5 of those post offices are here in Dutchess County. So ladies and gentlemen, Tony Musso.
Thank you, David. I want to thank the Historical Society and especially the town historian Nancy Kelly for inviting me to speak at today's ceremony. I did a lot of research for that first book of mine, which came out a few years back, FDR and the Post Office. And, you know, it dawned on me that FDR's personal life and his public life have been very well documented through the years in books and documentaries and films. And when most people think of FDR, they might think of the war president due to the many famous pictures that are out there of him and Winston Churchill at overseas conferences. Other people think of Roosevelt as the only person in United States history that served more than 2 terms in office. Of course, Roosevelt served 4. That hadn't happened prior, and it will never happen again. And others still remember FDR for his Fireside Chats radio series. But what's really overlooked and not widely known is the very, very close association that Franklin Roosevelt had with the Department of the Post Office. And that association started when he was just a child, and it continued right up until the day he died on April 12, 1945. The association began when Franklin was 8 years old, and his parents, James and Sarah, introduced him to the hobby of stamp collecting. That hobby became a lifetime passion for him. And as he grew older, you know, you may think of him as a man of great wealth and stature, but he never once during his lifetime viewed the hobby for financial benefits. He always viewed it for the education that he could get from stamp collecting. For instance, he would put typically 1 stamp on a page in the album, and he would rather research the topic, the person, place, or event on a stamp because he had a very keen interest, even at that young age, in history and geography. So by that, he got a very unique and unorthodox way to learn about different topics that he might have never looked into otherwise. When Franklin Roosevelt became President of the United States, the first thing he did was he appointed his campaign manager, James Aloysius Farley, to what I call the plum position in his cabinet, and that was the Postmaster General. And those 2 men working together elevated stamp collecting to new heights. It became the premier hobby during his lifetime. And he, like David said in his remarks, he not only assumed the role of an assistant postmaster general and approved more than 200 stamps during his 4 terms, and I can tell you he was not a rubber stamp president. He sent several back because of the 11th hour they were ready to go to print and he found one thing wrong on the stamp. FDR was all about historical accuracy and he insisted on that. Many of the sketches that I saw, the hand-drawn sketches that he submitted and became stamps, were done on White House stationery, very haphazard, and I have some of the illustrations in the book. His very first stamp was honoring the Mothers of America, and that came out on Mother's Day in 1934. So he was very, very involved from an early age and stayed involved with the Post Office Department. Now, aside from that, when FDR took office, the nation was still suffering from the effects of the Great Depression. Nearly 20% of the nation's financial institutions were forced to shut their doors, and as a result, 15% of Americans lost their lifetime savings. Unemployment at that time was at alarming levels. Every city, town, hamlet across the nation had high levels of their citizens unemployed. Within weeks of taking office as president, Franklin Roosevelt created a number of programs designed to help America get back on its feet. Combined, those programs were dubbed Roosevelt's New Deal. One of the most aggressive programs of all of those developed was the Works Projects Administration, better known as the WPA, an initiative that was introduced to bring unemployed and able-bodied people back into the workforce. It was Roosevelt's idea that he did not want to simply give funds, relief funds to people. He wanted them to work and get the funds. And there were two reasons for that. Number one, the government would be getting something back for the effort of putting the money forward. And the second reason, and perhaps more important in Roosevelt's mind, was it would bring people back, give them a sense of self-esteem after suffering the ravages of the Great Depression. As a result of that program, thousands of federal buildings were constructed all over the nation. And in my opinion, it wasn't a coincidence that 406 of those thousands of buildings were post offices. Franklin Roosevelt was very, very tied to the post office. In 1933, allotments in excess of $43 million was approved to support the WPA projects. If a community like Rhinebeck wanted to have a federal building, the way it worked was the municipality would pay for the equipment and the materials. The federal government would pay the salaries of the laborers. And so it was. And Dutchess County became the only county in the United States to be blessed with 5 WPA post offices. And I'll tell you those post offices now, starting on the southern end and not in this order. The Beacon Post Office was the first, the Poughkeepsie Post Office, the Wappingers Falls Post Office, the old one, that is the only one of the 5 that is no longer a post office. It was replaced in the late 80s due to significant growth in the community. And then Hyde Park and Rhinebeck. In order to bring back a sense of pride into the communities after the Great Depression, Roosevelt had another idea in mind. He didn't want to just put up new shiny buildings. He mandated that each of the 5 post offices built in Dutchess County be designed after another important structure that was significant to that community's history, so that when the people visited, they'd feel a sense of pride. The Wappingers Falls Post Office was designed after the Messier Homestead, which was a 1700s home that actually sits right across the street from that building to this day. In Poughkeepsie, that is a very enlarged version of the original Dutchess County Courthouse, which sat 2 blocks south of the post office and was where the New York State Constitution was ratified. New York State ratified the Constitution. Very significant to local and national history. The post office on the corner of East Market Street and Route 9 in Hyde Park is an exact replica of John Bard's house. And John Bard was a physician during the mid-1700s, and he was the one that named the town. He named it after Edward Hyde, governor of the colony of New York. When Roosevelt arrived and selected Rhinebeck as the next post office to be constructed, he wanted it to be an authentic reproduction of a house that sits on the south side of today's Rhinecliff Road and just west of where we are today. Built in 1700 by Henry Kipp, the home was purchased in 1726 by Colonel Henry Beekman Jr. It served as a very important structure in this town and for nationwide reasons, because Beekman was one of the primary leaders of the Continental cause prior to the American Revolution. As such, he held many meetings in that house for the development and forming of the future colonies. In addition, The house served as the gathering place for a religious congregation who sat there and heard the first sermon ever preached in the town of Rhinebeck. When they made the decision to put a post office in Rhinebeck, the government purchased the town hall and an adjacent store which sat right on the site we're sitting on today. And they did that to demolish it and make room for this post office. By the way, that town hall also included a post office at that time, so it was kind of poetic justice that we were replacing it with a post office. They made a deal with the current owner of the property out there, and they were able to incorporate some of the original stones from the ruins of the Kip Beekman house, because by that time it had been destroyed by fire, and they were incorporated into this building here, some of the original stone that was used down there. I was pretty flabbergasted when I was doing research on this chapter because I could not believe the amount of letters that went between the president and the architect, the president and the project manager, and the muralist. There was cases and cases of files. He took a very keen interest in these buildings. He didn't just rubber stamp it and walk away from it. In fact, to illustrate that, on May 31st, 1938, when they drove President Roosevelt up to the foundation of the ruins so he could assist the architect in putting this building together as an authentic reproduction. In fact, when they built the building, and it takes some time after the ceremony, to go around to the side of the building and look straight up, there is a 10-inch round bullseye window that serves no purpose whatsoever. It's just in a closet area upstairs in the attic area. And Roosevelt wanted that bullseye window included in this building. That's how exact a reproduction he wanted this to be. And this is the original part of 3 parts that eventually were constructed from the house, but this is the original house. It looked exactly like this. FDR was particularly happy when the building went up to learn that 2 cabinets would be put on the walls, the front interior walls of the post office lobby. One contains a lintel stone that was inscribed and dated by Henrik Kipp, 1700, when the house went up. That's located right here in the lobby. The other cabinet that was built to contain a sash with a piece of glass that was inscribed by Margaret Beekman and her husband Robert R. Livingston. When the colonel passed away, his daughter Margaret Beekman inherited the house, and with her husband Robert Livingston, they raised 10 children in that house. Now, FDR never really intended to just create work for electricians and plumbers and carpenters and contract workers. And so they came out with a mural competition where artists from all around the country sent in renderings, and they would compete to put artwork inside all the lobbies of his WPA post offices. But similar to FDR's goals with the buildings themselves, FDR mandated that the murals inside the building would reflect the history of the community they served through the centuries. Now, if you go into this lobby, you'll see that panel 1 is a depiction of the vessel Half Moon traveling up the Hudson River and commanded by Henry Hudson as it passed Rhinecliff. And if you follow the history all around the lobby and come to just over the entrance door, there's a small rendition of the original dedication ceremony that took place right on this site on May 1st, 1939. And you'll see Franklin Roosevelt and the Prince and Princess of Denmark and Iceland in that mural. So that was the most contemporary part of it. Again, it's a great honor, having done all the research for the book that I did, to be part of this presentation. I spent a 38-year career with the Postal Service. I was a writer-editor, I was a media spokesperson, and it never lost on me how involved Roosevelt was with the post office, because I frequently used the archives and his name came up almost every day in the records there. I would encourage you after the ceremony today to take some time, go inside, look at the murals, and on subsequent visits when you come, I know we're a rush society today, but take some time and look at 1 or 2 panels, learn what they're all about, what they reflect. because in my opinion, from reading all of Roosevelt's records and letters and everything else, I really believe that he did not put this up just as a post office, nor did he did the other 4 in Dutchess County. These are basically archives. They're museums to the history of the communities they serve. And so as you go in, you know, and his goal would be to share the history through the centuries with you as you went in and looked at the history of Rhinebeck, and there are a lot of other artifacts inside. So thank you again for inviting me, and thank you.
Okay, I want to thank everyone who participated in the program. Of course, Tony Musso, Mike Frazier, who played the part of FDR, Wayne Reifenberg and Alex Zabo as escort Secret Service agents for the president, Cicely Frazier, who played Eleanor, Brenda Claproth, who plays the part of Laura Delano, and town historian Nancy Kelly, who put this program together, and Alan and Linda Shear, who played the Prince and Princess. And of course, I really want to thank Michael Letteries, our postmaster, who let us have the program on the lawn of the post office and has kept the post office open so you can go in there and view the murals. For the car, Ernie Stevenson, who's head of the Palatine Farmstead, yes. Right? And is the driver of the car. Thank you very much. And thank everyone for coming. Enjoy this beautiful day.
It's a town just like any other town of 1,000 population in the whole United States.